Good evening, everyone. Myself, Dr. Pooja Oja. I am Assistant Professor in the Department of Physiology, AIIMS Jodhpur. I welcome you all to this fourth lecture of the webinar series on basic research methodology and thesis writing in physiology, which is organized by the Department of Physiology, AIIMS Jodhpur, in collaboration with the Physiological Society of India. Today, I will be talking about formulating objectives and selecting study designs. So, by now, you have in the previous lectures or sessions, you have learned how to identify the topic of your research or the area of your research. Then, with the help of extensive literature search, you have learned how to identify the gaps in the knowledge or the lacuna in that area of your research. Then you've learned how to come up with a research question using the finer criteria, and finally how to develop a hypothesis. So these have been taken up in the previous sessions. Today I shall be telling you about formulating objectives, selecting an appropriate research design, and how you are able to make your study a good quality study. The analysis of the data and drawing conclusions and publications of the research will be taken up in the subsequent sessions. So, coming to the first part, there is an important section in your thesis, that is aim and objectives. When you're writing your protocol, your thesis, you have to state the aim of your research. So what is the aim and what are the objectives? Aim is that gap in the knowledge which you're trying to fill up through your study, through your research. And objectives are those steps which you take to achieve your aim. So objectives are very essential for your research. They will guide you through the research and save a lot of time. Objectives of the research, they relate directly to the research question and they address the outcome of research. The objectives should be SMART. SMART here would stand for, they should be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and they should be time bound. When you have done your research, you have done your thesis, you have come to a conclusion. Then conclusions are to be matched with the objectives at the end of the study. Now I will give you an example to tell how to formulate SMART objectives to achieve the aim. Remember the first lecture where you were told about a study. The aim of the study was to detect the airway narrowing in asymptomatic school children having family history of asthma. Now, if this is the aim of the study, in order to move through the study, objectives need to be framed. So let us have a look at the objectives. In order to detect airway narrowing, you know that airway narrowing can be detected with the help of the peak expiratory flow rate. So the first objective is to record the peak expiratory flow rate in the sample of the asymptomatic school children. Then we are also knowing that in order to in order to predict airway narrowing, we have to compare the observed value with the predicted value. So here the objectives which have been framed are to record PEFR in the sample of asymptomatic school children, to calculate the predicted value of PEFR, and to detect airway narrowing using observed and predicted values of the PEFR. Now, you should note that objectives should clearly state what is being measured or what is being studied, or which variables are being compared. So here what you see, one has to detect the airway narrowing. This airway narrowing is the outcome of the research. It is the dependent variable. So in order to frame your objectives better, you need to know, you need to understand what are variables and how they should be measured accurately to add quality to your study. Variables, it is, we all know, it's a characteristic that can vary or that can change. Example, yes, you are saying age, weight, height, blood pressure, pulse rate, all these are variables which can change. It can be either independent variable or it can be a dependent variable. As the name suggests, independent variable, it does not depend on any other variable in the scope of the study. We are talking about the study, so in that scope of the study, that independent variable will not depend on other variables. Outside the study, it may depend, but within the scope of the study, it will not depend on the other variables. On the other hand, dependent variable, as the name suggests, it depends on the other variables in the study, and it is the one being tested or measured. Let us take some examples. In the previous example, the presence of airway narrowing in asymptomatic school children having family history of asthma. Here what you see, what is being looked at, what is being measured, it is the presence of the airway narrowing. So this airway narrowing is a dependent variable. It is dependent on the other variables, whereas family history of asthma is the independent variable. Or it is also the exposure or the risk factor. Here the airway narrowing is the dependent variable, or it is the outcome of the research. Second example, we are all commonly doing that one experiment in the clinical lab, that is effect of exercise on blood pressure. So when one is measuring or estimating the effect of exercise on blood pressure, here blood pressure is dependent on the changes in the exercise. Blood pressure becomes the dependent variable, whereas exercise can be manipulated or is manipulated by the researcher, and it is the independent variable. So you need to define your variables, you need to define your independent, dependent variables, and this will also be required while you are plotting the graphs. So you have to be clear about which is your dependent variable, which is your independent variable. Third example, effect of endurance training on VO2 max. Here VO2 max is dependent on the endurance training. So VO2 max becomes the dependent variable, and endurance training, it can be manipulated, it can be changed, it is the independent variable. Another important point is that measurement of these study variables should be precise, accurate for a good quality study. So what do I mean by precision and accuracy? Precision is getting the same result on repeating the measurement. Accuracy or validity is how close the measurement is to the true value. Here what you see, there are two pictures which are shown. If the measurement of variables is not accurate, as you can see in the picture, there is a little pressure in the column, in the mercury column. In this picture you can see that it is not at 0. Why do we tell our students to check the instrument? Why do we tell them to take precaution while measuring while measuring something in the study? It is because it can add to an error. It can add to an unrectifiable systematic error, which will be a measurement bias. So as you can see in the other picture, while taking weight, one has to ensure that it is at 0. If it is not at 0 or your instrument is not calibrated, then it can lead to adding this extra amount of the weight every time you are taking measurement. Here what you see, this little extra weight will be added systematically to the observations you are taking. And here also what you see, this little blood pressure, 2 millimeters of mercury, it will be added every time you are recording the blood pressure. So therefore, use standardized, validated tools and calibrated instruments and standard operating procedures for data collection. So here I've also mentioned questionnaire. If your study has a questionnaire which is used to collect the data, this questionnaire is being used as a tool, then that questionnaire has to be a validated questionnaire. If you have framed the questions yourself and you are using it in your study, it is probably not validated. You first need to plan a pilot study to get it validated, and then only you can use it in your research. So always use standardized methods, validated tools, and calibrated instruments to get the accurate results, and that will add to the good quality research. Here, these two are not accurate. Now, moving to the next important part of your thesis or research, that is material and methods. It is a very important part, as methodology over here is defined step by step. You have to state the type of study. You have to state the sampling strategy. You have to specify the population, state the sample size, you have to define the case, and you have to clearly state the inclusion-exclusion criteria for recruitment of the subjects. Then you have to, in the methodology part, you have to state the data collection tools, what instruments, what tools you are using to collect the data, to measure the variables. Then finally, after collection of that, you have to process the data and analyze the data. So I will be taking up the study design, that is the type of study. Let us have a look at the different types of study designs. The first question which is asked is there an intervention? So what is an intervention? What can be an intervention in your study? It can be a new device, it can be a pharmacological agent, or it can be a non-pharmacological agent, like you must have read about the effect of yoga or effect of exercise or pranayam on various diseases or premenstrual syndrome. So it can be an intervention, a non-pharmacological agent. Then it can be a diagnostic procedure, or if you are doing research in medical education, it can be an educational tool which is used to study and which is used in comparison with another standard method. So if there is no intervention in your study, it becomes an observational study design. If there is an intervention, it is an experimental or interventional study design. And the important one is the RCT, that is the randomized control trials. So this randomized control trials, they have two important features. They have randomization and they have a control group. In case you have an intervention, but there is no control group or there is no randomization, then you are probably doing a quasi-experimental design. Quasi is something like experimental, but it is not exactly the experimental design, because that needs a true randomization and a control group. So this is what you need to know. Now, if there is no intervention and you are into an observational type of study, the next question is there a comparison group? If there is no comparison group, then it is a descriptive type of study designs. You are probably aware of the case reports, case series, and cross-sectional. These are the different types of descriptive study designs. If there is a comparison group, then it is an analytical study design, which can be cohort, case control, or cross-sectional again. So now let's start with the observational studies. Observational studies, as I've stated, it can be descriptive or it can be analytical. Descriptive studies, they just simply tend to describe what has happened. There is no comparison because there is no comparison groups available. So these studies, they tend to explore the patterns of disease occurrence. They tend to state the frequency distribution of the disease, and they document risk factors for the disease. These studies are important because they are useful for hypothesis generation. So it was found that occurrence of Kaposi sarcoma was linked to the AIDS patients. So this led to generation of the hypothesis that Kaposi sarcoma may be linked to the AIDS patients. And this type of hypothesis can be tested with the help of the analytical study designs. These designs are a little better than descriptive because they have a comparison group, and you can compare what has happened in one group with the other group. And these allow testing hypothesis about the exposure risk factor outcome or the exposure outcome or the risk factor and disease relationships. And they are used for hypothesis testing. So now let's take up the basic type of descriptive study design, that is case report and case series. Case report is if there is a disease which has been described in a single patient, then it is a case report. Or if there is a series of reports, series of patients who have similar symptoms, it has been described, then that forms a case series. So it describes the description of case without a control group. It is simply stating what has happened. How it has happened, that cannot be answered by the case reports. But these are still good form of designs because they are first form of publication. The first paper or publication where something new can be brought up. These are fast, inexpensive, they can generate hypothesis, they can bring to our notice something which is unrecognized or which is unknown, and something which is found by chance. The limitations of this is that they have a limited potential to establish the causal effect. They cannot state why the things happened in that way. So, but they can do tell what has happened. Every design has to be, while you are publishing your research, you are publishing your data, you are publishing your paper, you have to state the reporting guideline. So the reporting guideline for case report is the CARE. I will be telling about how you can get this, from which website you can get this. So this is for the case report. Let us take an example. This study was done in our department, intraoperative neurophysiological monitoring of proximal occlusion of the vertebral artery in arteriovenous malformation. So this was a case report from the Department of Physiology, AIIMS Jodhpur, and Neurosurgery Department. So this brought to notice that intraoperative neurophysiological monitoring technique can be used to monitor the proximal occlusion of vertebral artery in patients having arteriovenous malformation. So that was the significance of this study. Next design is a cross-sectional study. These can be descriptive if they are looking at the prevalence survey, or they can be analytical when they are used to look at the exposure or disease association. So a single word to describe a cross-sectional study is these are like a snapshot, a picture. You do not know what has happened before, you do not know what will happen after this, but you can know what is there in that picture. So the exposure and outcome in a specified population are measured simultaneously. These are very good designed to describe the prevalence of disease. They are fast, inexpensive, they generate the hypothesis. Let us take an example. I want to study the occurrence of renal complications in patients with diabetes coming to the OPD in a given time period. So that for that study, I need to design a cross-sectional study. All the patients of diabetes, they are enrolling, and I am able to get the information all who all are having renal complications or renal dysfunctions. From this type of study, I can get the prevalence of renal dysfunction in patients with diabetes. Then these designs have some weakness. They have a limited potential to establish the causal effect. What has caused the disease? They have selection bias and they have measurement bias. Bias I have reserved for the last. So I will be describing what are these bias. But you should know that cross-sectional designs have certain bias which need to be taken into account. Next is the case control study. For your thesis, for your research, the most common design which you encounter will be the case controls type of study. These are a common first approach to test the causal hypothesis. Here what happens, the cases are compared with controls with respect to the exposure. So what are cases and what are controls? Cases are the subjects who have disease of interest and controls are the subjects who do not have the disease. These designs are very good, very suitable to study the rare diseases because the disease has already occurred, and they are good to study the multiple exposures. They are good for hypothesis testing. You can test the cause-effect relationship over here. Then they have some weakness too. The weakness is that they have not very good potential to establish the causal effect because it is not moving forward in time. It's a retrospective type of study. It can only study one outcome. The choice of control group can be difficult. Again, it has selection bias and recall bias. Since we are starting with the disease which has already occurred, then going back in time and asking the person whether he was exposed to the risk factor or not. So there is a chance that the person may have forgotten what happened or how the exposure was there. So it has some potential for recall bias. We will see in further designs how this recall bias can be rectified or how other designs are better and they do not have this recall bias. So as I said, choosing controls and cases is important. When you are writing your protocol, you have to define how you have chosen the cases. The definition of case is very crucial, very important to the case control study. This is where you state your inclusion criteria. If you are using patients, you have to state the diagnostic criteria, how that patient has been labeled to have that disease. Is there a standard procedure which has been used? Which is used to define the case. Then the cases and controls should be representative of the same population. Otherwise, you will be introducing the selection bias. Let us take the example of lung cancer and smoking. This is a very age-old example. What happens? We start from the disease. The lung cancer has already occurred. Cases with lung cancer are recruited and controls without lung cancer are recruited. Then they are asked questions about the exposure. That is, this is going back in time and this is a case control study design. So going back in time and asking them about the risk factor, it definitely has recall bias. But the advantage is that rare diseases can be studied and multiple exposures can be studied. That is, apart from smoking, you can ask about the alcohol history. So different type of exposures can be assessed or asked in this type of study design. What estimate you get is the odds ratio. Odds of exposure in those with disease to the odds of exposure in those without the disease. This is the estimate which you get from the case control study. If you are studying risk factors, you must have controls in your group. Without the controls, you cannot get the odds ratio. So while designing your study, you must make sure that if you are studying risk factors, you should have controls in your study. Another important thing is matching. The controls are selected in such a way that they are similar to the cases with regard to potential confounders. Confounders are factors which are equally associated with the exposure and the outcome. And this avoids the baseline differences between the cases and the control groups. Let us take an example. For a study which is assessing cognition in migraine patients, age is a confounding factor. We know that age has effect on cognition. So if I am recruiting patients who are younger patients in the case group and older patients in the control group, then definitely the cases and control groups are not comparable. I have to match the age. Controls should be age matched because age here is the confounding factor. Moving on to the next design, that is cohort study. These are gold standard of observational studies. A cohort of subject is free of disease and is followed and compared based on the exposure. These type of study move forward in time and they are very good to get the temporal association. They are very good because they do not have the recall bias because it is moving forward in time. This is compared from the case control study which has recall bias. So cohort study design is better to case control study because it does not have the recall bias. It has potential to establish the causal effect, what has actually caused the disease. It is good for hypothesis testing, but there are certain weaknesses: expensive, time consuming, attrition bias. There is, since these take long time, so there are chances that patients may be lost to follow up. So there is probability for attrition bias, and these are not suitable for rare diseases because we do not know whether the disease is going to occur or it will not occur. For rare diseases, you must go for case control study design. So an example would be following the patients of diabetes over years to look for the occurrence or development of renal complications. Like in the previous example, for the cross-sectional study, what I did was I studied the patients of diabetes who were coming to the OPD, and I just found out the prevalence of renal complication or renal dysfunction in those patients. So that gave me prevalence data. But now I want to see whether the patients of diabetes are actually developing renal complication or not. So I will be following these patients over years and years to look for development of renal complications. This is a good study design, but not much pertinent for your thesis. What estimate it gives? It gives the relative risk. So relative risk, cohort study gives the relative risk. Case control study design gives you the odds ratio. If you look at the direction of research, if you're starting from the disease and the disease has already occurred and moving back in time, asking about the history of exposure, then it is a case control study design. But if you are starting from the exposure, the disease has yet not occurred and you are moving forward in time, you are waiting for the disease to develop, then it is a cohort study design. So that should be clear. Again, the reporting style, it is the Strobe statement checklist of items that is used for the observational study. When you are reporting your study, you have to have some guidelines. So this one is used for the observational study, wherein you have to state the title and abstract, introduction, methods, study design, setting. I have taken only a screenshot of it. I will tell you the website later on how you can get these guidelines, from where you will get these guidelines. Coming to the interventional studies. Here the researcher introduces the exposure or the intervention in a sample and follows them to see the outcome of interest or the disease or the dependent variable. So the first question is there a control group? If there is a control group, then it is a controlled trial. If there is no control group, then you are probably doing a pre-post study design or a time series analysis. Since there is no control group and you are giving an intervention, then you will be probably collecting data before and after the intervention in the same participant. In the same participant, you are collecting data before and after, or at different time points with multiple interventions in the same participant. So if there is a control group, then the next question should be asked is, has randomization been done? If the randomization has been done, then it's a randomized controlled trial. If it is not done, then it is a non-randomized controlled trial. And as I said before, if there is no control group and if there is no randomization being done, then it is the type of quasi-experimental design. So, coming to the randomized controlled trials, there are some important points which I have highlighted which you should be knowing. I will be briefly talking about them in the context of this webinar. The control. What is the need to have controls in the study? Previously, I said if there is no control, then it becomes a quasi-experimental. So why the controls are so important? Then second point is the random allocation versus the allocation concealment. People get confused between random allocation and allocation concealment. Then what is blinding? So these 4 points, 4 things you should, if you understand them through this webinar, I will be happy. What is the need to have controls? Controls, they tend to take care of any alternate explanation of the research findings. They help in estimating the size of the effect or the observation. Let us take an example. In an interventional study on depression patients, antidepressant and placebo was given. Antidepressant was given to the case group and placebo was given to the control group. It was found that placebo group also showed nearly 40% improvement in the symptoms as compared to the antidepressant. So what does it mean? It means that the antidepressant only had 60% effect. If the control had not been here in the study, we would not have been able to know the effect size of the antidepressant on the depression symptoms. This control group has made it possible to estimate the size of the effect. The actual effect of antidepressant is only 60% because the placebo group also showed the 40% of the improvement in the symptoms. And this is taking care of the other alternative explanations which can be there. So that is the need of the control group, and definitely a better study design is one with a control group. Next important point is randomization. The strengths of randomization, to name a few, are randomization, allocation concealment, and blinding. So what the question next is, what is the purpose served by randomization? Randomization tends to distribute the extraneous factors randomly among the test arm and the control arm, which results in groups that are comparable and the effect can be attributable only to the intervention. So what is randomization actually doing? It is distributing the people in 2 groups randomly so that all the other factors which can affect the outcome, which can affect the result of the study, are randomly distributed and both the groups are comparable. There is no baseline difference between the 2 groups. Now, how it is done? It requires generation of the randomization schedule, which requires generation of the random numbers. These random numbers, they are assigned to each subject or the treatment condition. Note that alternate allocation or odd even distribution is not randomization. If I say that when the patient comes, the first one will go to the test arm, the second one will go to the control arm, that is not randomization. Because here I am not giving the chance to the second person to go into the first group and first person to go into the control group. So this is not randomization. It has to be generated with the help of numbers, and it has to be implicated in that way. Or if I say that all the odd, I number the people and I say that all the odd one will go to the test group and all the even one will go to the control group, that is also not randomization. Random numbers can be generated by computer. There are multiple of online free softwares which are there available. There are books on biostatistics which have the tables of random numbers. You can get them easily, and you can use Excel sheet for generation of random numbers. So this is one screenshot of the one of the software which is available. You can use it for generation of random numbers. There are websites which you can use, randomization.com, which you can use for generation of random numbers. Then coming to the next part, that is random allocation and allocation concealment. The strength of RCT is randomization, allocation concealment, and blinding. So here I'm talking about the randomization and allocation concealment. Random allocation, what it means? It means that each participant should have equal chance of being allocated to the test group or to the control group. In study participants, they should be randomly distributed to the test arm and study arm. That is, the allocation of the subjects to the two groups should be random. What is allocation concealment? When we generate a random numbers and assign them to the participants, those random numbers should not be known to the researcher who is allocating the participants. Otherwise, if he knows that this is the pattern or this is the sequence, then he might enroll the desirable candidate into the test group or into the control group. So that sequence should be concealed, should be hidden from the one who is allocating the patients, the participants into the two groups. So that is why allocation concealment is very important to ensure that random allocation is done properly. And this is done by a third person who creates the randomization scheme and places the treatment allocation for individual participants in a sequentially numbered opaque envelopes which are sealed. There are other methods as well. I'm talking about briefly in just in this webinar, so you can access the other methods as well. So I hope that random allocation has been well differentiated from allocation concealment. In random allocation, the sequence which was generated has to be concealed. Nobody should know, not nobody, but the one who is allocating the participant should not know where, in what sequence the patients are being allocated, so that he does not have an access to enrolling the patients as per his choice. This is a comprehensive flow chart where you can see the three processes which are important for RCT, that is randomization, allocation concealment, and blinding. First, there has to be generation of the random sequence generation. There can be a simple randomization, block randomization, or stratified randomization. Then this sequence needs to be concealed. That is concealed in the envelopes, and then this procedure of the methodology is conducted, that is intervention is conducted, and what is taken care of is blinding of these four groups. Most common is the double blind, but if possible, all four can be blinded, it will be a total blind, which is difficult to achieve. So if the patient is blinded, the physician is blinded, it is a double blind. And if the assessors are blinded, it's a triple blind. And if even the statistician is blinded, it's a quadruple blinding of the groups. Then after this, the results are assessed and then analysis is done. So there is some weakness as well. It's expensive study design. It can take a long period. It is not suitable to study rare events. And there are a lot of ethical considerations. If one group is being given a good drug or a new drug, then other group or the test group whether it is to be given placebo or it is to be given the standard of care treatment, that those are all questions which are to be considered while planning the RCT. How to report the RCT? The CONSORT is the guideline which is used for reporting the randomized control trials. Now, how to make your study a good quality research? A good quality research will depend upon the study design. Study design will depend upon how you have recruited your participants. What was the sampling method which you have used? What was the measurement plan and how you have been able to control the bias? So, what is bias? Any variable that is not of interest but that might influence the result is a potential confound or source of bias. Remember, errors in design cannot be rectified later on. So, if you have mistaken, you have not planned it well, you have not planned your study well, you have not taken care of the bias, you have not taken care of the control group, it cannot be rectified when your study has been completed, and it will be a terrible study. So consult a biostatistician at the designing point of the study. When you are considering the sample size, even before that, you can consult the biostatistician for designing your research. This one I reserved for the end, so now I will be taking up selection bias. Selecting people who are not true representative of the study population. Let's take examples. The first one is selecting hospital staff for assessing the knowledge about hand washing technique in a study which requires general population. So obviously there is selection bias because the hospital staff is definitely going to be much more aware or having much more knowledge about the hand washing technique as compared to the general population. So if it is about general population, then sample should have been recruited in that way. Second example, selecting trained athletes as controls and patients from general population as cases for assessing risk factors for myocardial infarction. If you are assessing risk factors for myocardial infarction, definitely the trained athletes will be at a better end, will be not having those many factors as compared to the general population. And here the case group and the control group is not comparable. They have to be from the same population. And this is how you can avoid the selection bias. So the solution for selection bias is random selection. Do not confuse random selection with random allocation, which I talked just now. Just before, while I was talking about the RCT, I talked about random allocation. Here I am talking about random selection. So what is random selection? Every unit of population has equal chance of participating in the study. If I have 9 residents, I want to divide them into 2 groups to go to the hematology lab, to go to the clinical lab. I shall do the random selection. I will be first labeling all the people, all the participants which are there, and then after I will be generating the random numbers. How they are generated? They can be generated using a DICE, a random number table can be used, or computer generated random numbers can be used. So after generating those random numbers, I need sample of 3. If I need a sample of 3, I will generate 3 random numbers. It can be from 1 to 9, and those who fall into that category, they can be recruited into the study. So what purpose it is serving? It tends to take care of the external validity. Your study becomes good study design because your results can be extrapolated to the to the general population or the intended population. If your study has a selection bias, then the results which you get from your study cannot be generalized to the intended population. And this random selection will ensure that the results of your study can be generalized or extrapolated, and it improves the external validity of your study. So that was selection bias. Coming to the design bias, allocating less vulnerable people to cases group and more vulnerable to control group. This is an example of the design bias. How can it be taken care of? Can be taken care of by the random allocation. Let's look at two examples. First one, allocating patients with moderate depression grade to control group and patients with mild depression grade to cases group for assessing the effect of yoga on depression symptoms. Person is assessing the effect of yoga on depression symptoms, and he has assigned people with mild depression grade to the cases group who are being given intervention of yoga, and people with moderate depression grade to the control group who are not being given the intervention. So definitely people with mild depression grade will show more improvement, and this is not a comparable group. Both the groups are not comparable. Here there is problem with the allocation. Allocation of the subjects should have been random. Whether it is mild depression, moderate depression, should have been randomly assigned into the cases and the control group to make the two groups more comparable. Let's take the second example. Allocating obese people to control group and overweight people to cases group for assessing response to dietary modification on weight. Obese people are in the control group and overweight people are in the cases group. Definitely they will show better response. So this can be sorted out with the random allocation, which I talked about along with the RCT. Next comes in line with the measurement bias, also called the detection bias. Error that occurs in collection of data in a study leads to measurement bias. There can be a recall bias, there can be a Hawthorne effect, or while measuring the data, while measuring from the instrument, as I said previously, while you are measuring your, taking your data, using your instruments, you should ensure that it is taken accurately, otherwise that will introduce the measurement bias. So if I've not taken a control group and I'm doing some experiment, there can be a Hawthorne effect, which is the act of being observed itself changes the observation. I'm observing the case group, I've not taken a control, the case can improve or show improvement in the symptoms just because of being observed. So that can be taken care of by having a control group. Control group should also show similar improvement. Now, what measures are to be taken? That is, try to use the same instrument for collecting all the data. Same experimenter, same person should record, because that will be what the errors are there. They will be evenly distributed. Then try to take the data at the same time of the study, same time of the day, to take care of the circadian phenomena. Next in line is the ascertainment bias. It can be either assessor bias or it can be a respondent's bias. Assessor bias exists when the behavior of the researcher influences the behavior of the research participants, which favors the outcomes they are expecting. If the experimenter knows that this particular patient is in the case group, he is getting that new drug, then he might interact with that person in a very friendly or cordial manner, and he may not even pay attention to the one who is in the control group. So that will affect the results of the study, and that will lead to the assessor bias. On the other hand, respondent's bias occurs if the behavior of the participant changes due to the knowledge of being in the case or control group. If the patient knows that I am getting a new drug, I am getting a good intervention, then he might psychologically feel better, or he might show some positive response which is not actually there. So this can lead to respondent's bias. So this is taken care of by the blinding. Now, coming back to RCT. RCT takes care of selection bias, design bias, ascertainment bias, and therefore it is a highly rated study design. If there is less bias in your study, your design becomes better and better. So how do we know that our research has worked? Study designs, they can be ranked based on the ability to control bias and to demonstrate the evidence for whether an exposure is related to the outcome or a factor is related to the disease. The evidence generated by the study demonstrates true association or causality between the exposure and the outcome variables. Why this is important? Because decision making in clinical practice is now based on the evidence which is sought from the research publications. This is already introduced to you. This was introduced to you in the first lecture, the evidence-based medicine. This pyramid shows the different studies which are there, and as we move up in the pyramid, the bias tends to get decreased or the bias tends to get minimized. So here are the randomized controlled trials. What is sitting above it? This is the systematic reviews and meta-analysis. So these are even better than RCT. So first of all, what is systematic review? Process of selecting, evaluating and synthesizing all available evidence regarding a topic, regarding an area can be formed, can lead to the systematic review. It has a particular study design, it has a protocol which is to be followed. Not just any article can be taken. There has to be an inclusion criteria, which study will be, which publication will be taken into account. And let me tell you, this is all derived from the already published data. This already published papers which are there, they are taken, they are included in the study in a definite design to form the systematic reviews. If I want to know which drug works best in diabetes, I will search the literature, I will take all the evidence which is available, then synthesize them into a coherent manner, follow a design, and then I will come up with a systematic review. So this is to be reported with the PRISMA checklist. What is a meta-analysis? Meta-analysis refers to the statistical approach which is used to combine the data derived from the systematic reviews. The systematic reviews, all the studies which are there, when they are analyzed statistically, it leads to the meta-analysis, and this is top ranking or the highest or the best form of study design which can be there. Now you have done your study, you are about to submit your manuscript. While you are submitting your manuscript, when you log into the author account, you might get this type of window where you have to select the study type which is most appropriate for your manuscript. Here you can see a list of study designs. From here you have to choose your study design. And why? Because you will be guided to a reporting checklist which is associated with your study type selection. That is why you should know what study design you have used, and then you will be you have to submit your manuscript according to the reporting guidelines. So as I told you, this is a website freely available, Equator Network. You can check this. The consort guidelines, they are for the RCTs, STROPE for the observational study, PRISMA for the systematic reviews, and so on. So you can check this website and you can find their details, and you can get the guidelines how to report your study. Now summarizing it all, if you are looking for prevalence, go for a cross-sectional study. If you are studying risk factors or exposures, go for a case control study. If you are looking for temporal relationship and incidence data, go for a cohort study design. And if you're planning some intervention, go for the experimental study design. So the take home message, navigating through your study design, ask these 3 questions. Is there an intervention? Is there a control comparison group? Is there randomization? And this will help you, guide you through your research, and it will help you to know what design you have used. Thank you all for patient listening.